The woman standing on the auction block had eyes the color of storm clouds, and when they met Yates Fletcher's gaze across the crowded square in Park City, Utah, something inside his chest twisted like a knife between ribs. It was the spring of 1872, and the mountain town bustled with fortune seekers, trappers, and men whose morals had long since been buried beneath layers of greed and whiskey. Yates had come down from his cabin in the high country for supplies, his pack horse loaded with beaver pelts and wolf furs that would fetch good prices. He stood a head taller than most men in the crowd, his shoulders broad as an axe handle beneath his buckskin coat, his dark hair hanging past his collar in waves that caught the afternoon sun. His beard was trimmed close to his jaw, revealing the strong line of bone beneath, and his hands, scarred and capable, rested on his belt as he watched the scene unfold with growing disgust. The auctioneer, a rat-faced man named Silas Marsh, held up a piece of paper and called out in a voice that carried across the square. "This here is Lila Bradford, come to us all the way from Boston." Her father owed considerable debts before he passed, and Miss Bradford here signed herself into a labor contract to settle them accounts. She can read, write, cipher numbers, and cook a fine meal. Starting bid is $20 for the remainder of her 3-year contract. Lila stood rigid on the platform, her hands clenched at her sides. She wore a plain gray dress that had seen better days, but she held her chin high despite the tears threatening to spill from those remarkable eyes. Her dark blonde hair was pinned back in a simple knot, and though her face showed the exhaustion of someone who had traveled far and suffered much, there was a defiance in her posture that spoke of unbroken spirit. 25, called out a merchant Yates recognized from the dry goods store. 30, came another voice. Yates felt his jaw tighten. He had seen contract labor before, had watched desperate people sell years of their lives to pay debts or buy passage west. Most were treated like slaves in everything but name, worked until they broke, cast aside when they were no longer useful. The practice turned his stomach. $40, announced a new voice, and the crowd parted to reveal Marcus Devlin, owner of the Lucky Dollar Saloon. Devlin wore a fancy vest and had slicked his hair back with pomade. His smile showed too many teeth as he looked Lila up and down like she was a horse he was considering for purchase. "Pretty thing like that will bring in customers. They will pay well for drinks served by such a refined lady." Lila's face went pale, and Yates saw her hands begin to tremble. Everyone in Park City knew what working in Devlin's saloon really meant. The man ran a brothel upstairs, and girls who started serving drinks rarely stayed downstairs for long. Devlin had ways of manipulating contracts, adding penalties and fees until the workers owed more than they could ever repay. $40 going once, Marsh called out. Fine establishment like the Lucky Dollar would be perfect for a lady with manners and education. Yates looked at the leather pouch hanging from his belt. Inside was every penny he had earned from a hard winter in the mountains, $215 in gold coin and paper money. It was meant for supplies, for ammunition and flour and salt, and all the things he needed to survive another year in his isolated cabin. He had planned to save the rest, maybe buy more traps, perhaps even purchase a breeding pair of horses to start a small herd. But when Lila's eyes found his again across that crowd, when he saw the desperate plea in their depths, and the way her lower lip quivered as she fought to maintain her composure, he knew what he had to do. $40 going twice, Marsh raised his gavel. 50, Yates' voice cut through the square like thunder before a storm. Every head turned toward him. The crowd parted as he walked forward, his boots heavy on the packed dirt. He was aware of how he must look, this mountain man who spent months at a time in the wilderness, dressed in worn buckskins and furs while these town folk wore their store-bought clothes. But he kept his eyes fixed on Lila, and he saw something shift in her expression. Not quite hope, not yet, but perhaps the faintest beginning of it. Devlin's face darkened. 55. 100, Yates said without hesitation. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Marsh's eyes went wide with greedy delight. $100. Now that is a serious bid, gentlemen. Do I hear 105? Devlin studied Yates with narrowed eyes, clearly trying to determine how much money the mountain man actually had. 110. Yates reached for his pouch and untied it from his belt. He walked right up to the platform and emptied the entire contents onto the wooden surface in front of Marsh. Gold coins clinked and rolled, paper money fluttered, and the total sum lay there in the afternoon sunlight for everyone to see. $215, Yates said, his voice low and steady. Every penny I've got to my name. I am buying her contract and then I am setting her free. The silence that fell over the square was absolute. Marsh stared at the money, his mouth working like a fish. Devlin's face flushed red with anger, but there was nothing he could do. The bid was legitimate and far beyond his means. Well, Marsh finally managed, his voice strangled. I believe we have a winner. $215 going once, twice, sold to the mountain man. Yates paid no attention to the papers Marsh thrust at him, the documents that supposedly transferred Lila's contract into his possession. He looked up at her instead, this woman whose name he barely knew, and said, "You are free. You do not owe me anything, you do not have to work for me or follow me anywhere. You are your own person, and these papers mean nothing." Then he took the contract and tore it in half, then quarters, letting the pieces fall to the ground like snow. Lila stared at him as if he had just spoken in a foreign tongue. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. Tears did fall then, tracking down her cheeks as she brought one shaking hand to her mouth. "I do not understand," she whispered. "Nothing to understand," Yates said, though his heart was pounding so hard he thought she must surely hear it. "You are free to go wherever you want, do whatever you choose. I will not stop you." He turned to walk away, his pouch now empty and light on his belt, his future in the mountains suddenly uncertain without the supplies he had planned to buy. But he had made it 3 steps when her voice stopped him. "Wait." He looked back to find she had climbed down from the platform and was standing just behind him, her eyes still brimming with tears but also confusion and something he could not quite name. "Why would you do such a thing?" she asked. "You spent everything. You do not even know me." Yates considered his answer carefully. The crowd was dispersing now, disappointed that the spectacle had ended, though he could feel many eyes still watching them. Devlin in particular looked furious as he stalked back toward his saloon. "No person should be bought and sold," Yates said finally. "No matter what papers say it is legal. You looked like you needed help and I had the means to provide it. That is all." "That is all," Lila repeated, her voice rising slightly. "You just gave away your entire fortune to a complete stranger and that is all you have to say about it." He almost smiled at the spirit in her words. "I have lived on less. I will manage." "Where will you go now?" she asked. "What will you do? Back to my cabin, I suppose. Up in the high country past the timber line. I will trap what I can, hunt for meat, get by until next spring." Even as he said it, he knew how hard it would be without proper supplies. He would have to rely entirely on the land, on his skills and knowledge. Men had died attempting less. Lila was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those storm-gray eyes. Finally, she said, "I have nowhere to go either. I came west with my father, but he died of pneumonia 2 months ago in Salt Lake City. We had nothing left, and I was forced to sign that contract to pay for his burial and my debts. I do not know anyone in this territory. I have no money, no prospects." She took a breath, squaring her shoulders. "So I propose a trade." "A trade?" "You need supplies and someone who can cook and manage a household. I need shelter and protection until I can figure out my next step. Let me come with you to your cabin. I will earn my keep, I promise. I am a hard worker and I learn quickly." Yates felt that twisting sensation in his chest again, only stronger this time. The thought of having Lila in his cabin, of sharing that small space with her, of waking each morning to find her there, it filled him with an emotion he had not felt in years. Something dangerous and wonderful and terrifying all at once. "It is no place for a lady," he said, though the words felt like they were being dragged from him against his will. "My cabin is small and rough, one room with a loft for sleeping. The winter is brutal at that elevation. There is no town nearby, no neighbors for miles. It is lonely and hard, and you would be isolated with a man you do not know." "As opposed to what?" Lila asked, and now there was heat in her voice. "Staying here and hoping Devlin does not find a way to trap me anyway. Trying to find work in a town where everyone now knows I was nearly sold like cattle. I have no illusions about my situation, Mr. Fletcher. I heard the auctioneer say your name," she added when he looked surprised. "I have nothing and no one. At least with you, I would have honest work and my freedom intact. Unless you are not the man I think you are." It was a challenge, plain and simple, and Yates recognized it as such. She was testing him, trying to determine if his noble gesture had strings attached after all. He respected her for it even as it stung. "I would not touch you," he said bluntly. "You would have the loft to yourself and I would sleep by the fire. You would be safe, Lila, I swear that on my life." Something in her expression softened. "I believe you, I do not know why, but I do." "So, do we have an agreement?" Every rational part of his mind screamed that this was a terrible idea. She was educated and refined from Boston society, while he was a rough mountain man who had chosen isolation over civilization years ago. They had nothing in common, and the arrangement could only end in disaster. She would hate the cabin within a week, would despair at the isolation, would come to resent him for taking her there. But when he opened his mouth, he heard himself say, "We have an agreement." The smile that broke across her face was like sunrise after a long night, and Yates felt something in his chest crack open, something he had kept locked away for so long he had forgotten it existed. They spent what little money Yates could scrape together from selling just one prime beaver pelt on basic necessities. Flour, salt, beans, coffee. Not enough for comfort, but enough to survive. Lila purchased a few items of her own with coins she had sewn into the hem of her dress. Practical things like needles and thread, a small knife, an extra blanket. She moved with efficiency through the general store, and Yates noted how she calculated prices in her head, how she chose function over form in everything she selected. By the time they left Park City, the sun was angling toward the western peaks. Yates had his pack horse loaded with their meager supplies, and he walked beside it while Lila kept pace at his side. She had changed into a more practical dress of dark blue wool, and she had tied a bonnet over her hair to keep the sun off her face. "How far is your cabin?" she asked as they followed the trail out of town and into the foothills. 2 days on foot," Yates replied. "We will camp tonight somewhere safe, then push on tomorrow. The last part is steep and the air gets thin. Tell me if you need to rest." "I will keep up," Lila said firmly. They walked in silence for a while, leaving the sounds of Park City behind as the wilderness rose up around them. Pine trees towered overhead, their branches swaying in the breeze. A creek burbled somewhere nearby, and birds called from the undergrowth. Yates felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease as civilization fell away. This was his world, these mountains and forests, and he moved through them with the confidence of long familiarity. Lila seemed less certain, picking her way carefully over roots and rocks, but she did not complain. When the trail grew steep, she simply hitched up her skirts slightly and climbed with determination. Yates found himself watching her from the corner of his eye, impressed despite himself. "You said you were from Boston," he ventured after a while. "What brought you and your father west?" "Gold fever," Lila said with a bitter laugh. "Like half the fools in this territory. My father was a clerk his whole life, worked for a shipping company and barely made enough to keep us fed. When news of strikes in Montana and Utah reached Boston, he became convinced our fortune was waiting out here. He spent our savings on passage west and mining equipment." She paused, her voice catching. "He was a good man, but he was not cut out for this life. The work was too hard, the conditions too harsh. When winter came, he caught pneumonia and there was no money for a proper doctor." "I am sorry," Yates said quietly. "He died thinking he had failed me," Lila continued. "His last words were an apology, but he had not failed. He tried to give us a better life, and that counts for something." She looked over at Yates, her eyes bright. "Just like what you did today counts for something, more than you probably realize." Yates did not know what to say to that, so he simply nodded and kept walking. They made camp that evening beside a stream, where the water ran cold and clear over smooth stones. Yates set up a simple shelter using pine branches and the canvas tarp from his pack, arranging it so Lila would be protected from wind and any possible rain. He built a fire, coaxed it to life with practiced ease, and soon had coffee brewing in a battered tin pot. Lila watched him work with curious eyes. "You make it look easy." "Years of practice," Yates said. "When you live alone in the mountains, you learn to be self-sufficient or you die. Simple as that." "How long have you been up there?" she asked. 5 years this summer." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. "I was a soldier before that, fought in the war. When it ended, I could not stomach the thought of going back to towns and people and all that noise. So I came west, kept going until I found a place remote enough that the world could not find me." Lila sipped her coffee, studying him over the rim of the cup. "What were you running from?" The question was direct and perceptive, and it caught him off guard. "What makes you think I was running from anything?" "Because happy people do not isolate themselves in the wilderness," she said simply. "They do not cut themselves off from all human contact for years at a time. You were either running from something or running to something, and given the way you talk about the war, I am guessing the former." Yates stared into the fire, watching the flames dance and flicker. No one had asked him these questions in years. No one had cared to look that deep. It would be easy to deflect, to change the subject, to hide behind walls he had spent half a decade building. But something about Lila, about the honesty in her eyes and the way she had trusted him today, despite having every reason not to, made him want to answer truthfully. "I saw things in the war," he said slowly. "Did things. Things that do not leave you no matter how many years pass. I watched good men die for causes they did not understand, watched boys barely old enough to shave get torn apart by artillery fire. And I killed. A lot. Because that was what soldiers did, what we were ordered to do." He took a drink of his coffee, the bitter taste matching his memories. "When it ended, everyone wanted to celebrate, wanted to pretend it had all meant something noble, but I could not pretend, so I left." Lila was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My father killed a man once. It was an accident, a fight that went too far outside a tavern in Boston. The other man died and my father was never the same. He was cleared of wrongdoing, self-defense they called it, but he carried that guilt every day for the rest of his life." I think that was part of why he wanted to come west, to escape the person he had become in that moment. Did it work? Yates asked. No, Lila said softly. You cannot outrun yourself. The ghosts follow you wherever you go. But maybe you can learn to live with them, find some kind of peace despite them. That is what I hope anyway. They sat in comfortable silence after that, drinking their coffee and listening to the night sounds of the forest. An owl hooted somewhere in the darkness. The stream continued its endless song. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling up toward the stars. When they finally bedded down for the night, Yates made sure Lila was settled in the shelter with plenty of blankets before he rolled himself in his own bedroll on the opposite side of the fire. He lay awake for a long time, staring up at the sky through gaps in the pine canopy, wondering what exactly he had gotten himself into. He had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten what it was like to be responsible for another person, to consider someone else's needs and comfort. It was unsettling and strangely pleasant all at once. Across the fire, he could hear Lila's breathing gradually even out as she fell asleep. Something about that sound, knowing she felt safe enough to sleep peacefully, made his chest tighten again with that unfamiliar emotion. He finally drifted off with her name on his mind, and the scent of pine smoke in his lungs. The next day dawned clear and bright, though the air had a bite to it that promised the high country cold would be sharp. They ate a quick breakfast of cornmeal mush cooked over the rekindled fire, then packed up camp and continued their journey. The trail grew steadily steeper as they climbed. The trees changed from mixed forest to predominantly pine and spruce, and eventually to twisted bristlecone pines that clung to rocky outcrops with gnarled roots. The air thinned, making each breath feel less substantial, and Yates could see Lila beginning to struggle. "We will rest," he said, calling a halt near a flat boulder that made a natural bench. "I am fine," Lila protested, though her face was flushed and her breathing came hard. "Sit," Yates said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The altitude takes getting used to. There is no shame in needing time to adjust." She sat with obvious relief, and Yates handed her his water skin. While she drank, he studied the landscape around them. They were high enough now that he could see the valley far below, Park City reduced to a collection of tiny buildings that looked like a child's toys. Above them, the true peaks rose toward the sky, their summits still capped with snow despite it being May. "It is beautiful," Lila said, following his gaze. "Terrifying but beautiful." "Wait until you see the view from the cabin," Yates said. "On clear days, you can see 3 different mountain ranges." They rested for 20 minutes, then pressed on. The final hours of the journey were the hardest, the trail little more than a narrow path that Yates had worn himself over years of use. They had to lead the packhorse carefully around switchbacks that dropped away into nothing, and more than once Yates reached back to steady Lila when loose stones shifted under her feet. But finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they crested a final rise, and there it was. Yates' cabin sat in a small meadow surrounded by towering pines, with a creek running along one side and a sheer cliff face protecting the back. It was indeed small, built from logs he had cut and fitted himself, with a stone chimney that rose above a sod roof. A small corral stood off to one side, empty now, and a lean-to shelter provided storage for firewood and tools. Lila stood beside him, taking it all in. He tried to see it through her eyes, this rough dwelling that had been his whole world. It must seem impossibly primitive to someone from Boston, impossibly isolated and crude. "It is perfect," she said, and the wonder in her voice sounded genuine. Something in Yates' chest eased. "Let me show you inside." The cabin's interior was dim after the bright afternoon sun, and it smelled of wood smoke and cured leather. One room indeed, as he had warned, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a ladder leading up to a sleeping loft under the peaked roof. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs sat near the hearth, and shelves lined the walls holding his few possessions. Furs were stacked in one corner, his traps hung on pegs, and his rifles stood in a rack near the door. It was spare but clean, organized with military precision. "The loft is all yours," Yates said, gesturing upward. "I will bed down here by the fire. There is a root cellar outside for keeping things cool, and the creek provides fresh water year-round. The privy is behind those trees to the east." Lila climbed the ladder to inspect the loft, and he heard her moving around up there. When she descended, her expression was thoughtful. "I will need to make curtains," she said, "and the loft could use a proper bed frame instead of just boards. Maybe we could build a storage chest too, and I noticed you have no real kitchen area. We should set up a work surface near the hearth, and you will need more shelves if I am going to organize properly." Yates stared at her. "You have been here 5 minutes and you already want to reorganize everything." "You said I could earn my keep," Lila replied, crossing her arms. "This is how I do that. I make this place into an actual home instead of just a shelter. Unless you object." He thought about objecting, about telling her his cabin was fine the way it was, that he had lived this way for 5 years without complaint. But looking at her standing there with her chin raised and determination in her eyes, he found he could not do it. If making changes helped her feel like this was her home too, then who was he to stop her? "No objection," he said. "We will start tomorrow." That first week passed in a blur of activity. Yates spent his days checking his trap lines, hunting for fresh meat, and helping Lila with the improvements she had planned. She proved to be remarkably capable with her hands, learning quickly how to use his tools, how to measure and cut boards, how to hammer nails straight. Together they built a proper bed frame for the loft, constructed a work table for food preparation, and added more storage throughout the cabin. Lila also transformed their meals. Where Yates had been content with simple fare, beans and jerky and hardtack, she created actual dishes. She showed him how to make sourdough bread using a starter she cultivated from flour and creek water. She gathered wild herbs from the meadow and used them to season venison stew. She even figured out how to bake passable biscuits in the Dutch oven over the fire. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Yates asked one evening as they sat down to a meal of roasted rabbit, greens she had foraged, and fresh bread. "My mother died when I was 12, Lila said. "After that it was just my father and me. If I wanted to eat well, I had to learn to cook. And our landlady in Boston was French. She taught me some things in exchange for helping her with her English." She smiled at the memory. Madame Leclerc said that food is love made edible, and that anyone can boil water, but it takes care to make something worth remembering. "Well, this is definitely worth remembering," Yates said, and meant it. As the days turned into weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Yates would rise before dawn, check his traps, hunt if needed, and tend to the endless tasks of mountain living. Lila would manage the cabin, prepare meals, mend clothes, and gradually expand her knowledge of the wilderness. She learned which plants were edible and which were poisonous, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to move quietly through the forest. They talked while they worked, sharing stories of their lives before this. Yates told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about his 3 brothers who had all died in the war, about the girl he had almost married before he enlisted. Lila spoke of Boston, of the cramped apartment she had shared with her father, of her dreams of becoming a teacher before poverty made such aspirations impossible. But more than the stories, It was the comfortable silences that surprised Yates. He had expected to feel crowded, to resent having someone in his space after so many years alone. Instead, he found Lila's presence soothing. The sound of her humming while she cooked, the sight of her reading by firelight in the evenings, the knowledge that she was safely asleep in the loft above him. All of it felt right in a way he had not anticipated. He was falling in love with her. He realized it one morning in early June, watching her stand in the meadow with her face turned up to the sun, her hair loose around her shoulders, because she thought he was still out checking traps. She looked so beautiful it hurt, and the realization of what he felt crashed over him like a rock slide. It was the worst possible thing that could have happened. She was here because she had nowhere else to go, because he had given her safe harbor when she needed it. She did not owe him anything, especially not affection or love. To pursue her, to confess his feelings, would be to abuse the power imbalance between them and betray the trust she had placed in him. So Yates said nothing. He buried his feelings deep and tried to act as if nothing had changed. But it was hard, so hard, especially as June gave way to July and he saw her blooming in the mountain air. The gauntness left her face, replaced by healthy color. She grew strong from the physical work, confident in her movements. And when she smiled, which she did more and more often, it lit up their little cabin like summer sunshine. Lila, for her part, seemed content. She threw herself into learning everything the mountains had to teach, and Yates found himself increasingly impressed by her resilience and intelligence. She was not just surviving in this harsh environment, she was thriving. But sometimes he caught her watching him with an expression he could not quite read, something tender and uncertain all at once. In those moments, his heart would race and he would have to look away, afraid of what his face might reveal. July brought the height of summer to the high country. The meadow exploded with wildflowers, painting the landscape in riots of color. Yates' trap lines were less productive now, as animals were abundant, and had no need to take his bait, so he spent more time hunting and fishing instead. He taught Lila to fish in the creek, standing beside her in the cold water and showing her how to read the current, where trout like to hide beneath undercut banks. "There," he said quietly, his hand covering hers on the fishing pole. "Do you feel that? The slight tug?" "Yes," Lila breathed, her eyes fixed on where the line entered the water. "Now pull back sharp, set the hook, then start reeling in steady. Do not jerk it or you will lose them." She followed his instructions, and moments later a fat rainbow trout broke the surface, thrashing on the line. Lila laughed with delight as Yates helped her land it, the fish flopping in the shallow water. "I did it," she exclaimed, her face bright with triumph. "You did," Yates agreed, and he was smiling too, unable to help himself. "That is a good-sized one too, enough for supper tonight." She looked up at him then, still smiling, and their eyes met and held. They were standing very close, he realized, close enough that he could see the droplets of water on her eyelashes, could smell the clean scent of her hair. Her lips parted slightly, and for one heart-stopping moment he thought she might kiss him. Then she stepped back, the moment breaking. "We should probably catch a few more to be safe." "Right," Yates said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Yes, a few more." They fished until they had 4 good-sized trout, then made their way back to the cabin. The ease between them had shifted somehow, become charged with something unspoken. Yates could feel it in the air, this new awareness, and he did not know what to do about it. That evening, after they had eaten the fish fried in cornmeal until the skin was crispy, Lila said, "I need to go into Park City." Yates looked up from cleaning his rifle, surprised. "Why?" "I need proper fabric to make winter clothes," she said, "and other supplies. Things I cannot make or find here. If I am going to stay through the winter, I need to prepare." The words, "if I am going to stay," hit him like a punch. He had hoped that she would remain, but of course she might not. She had never promised to stay permanently, and as summer waned, she would have to make a decision about her future. "When did you want to go?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "Soon," Lila said. "Before the weather turns, maybe next week." "I will take you," Yates said immediately. "You do not have to. I can go alone." "No." The word came out harder than he intended. "Park City is not safe for you alone. Devlin might still be angry about losing that contract. I will take you." Lila looked like she might argue, then nodded. "All right, thank you." They made the trip to Park City the following week, leaving before dawn to take advantage of the cool morning air. The descent was easier than the climb had been, and they made good time. Yates had trapped enough over the summer to have a decent collection of furs to sell, which would provide money for the supplies they needed. Park City had grown since their last visit. More buildings had gone up, more people crowded the streets. Yates felt the familiar tension returning to his shoulders as they entered the town, his awareness sharpening. He stayed close to Lila as they made their rounds, first to the trading post where he sold his furs, then to the general store where Lila selected fabric, needles, thread, and various other necessities. They were just leaving the store when a voice called out, "Well, well. If it is not the mountain man and his little investment." Yates turned to find Marcus Devlin leaning against a post, a cigarette dangling from his lips. The saloon owner had not aged well in the past months. His fancy clothes looked rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "We have no business with you, Devlin," Yates said evenly. "No business. That is cold, Fletcher. Especially considering you cost me a considerable sum back in spring. I had plans for Miss Bradford here. She would have been very profitable." Lila's hand found Yates' arm, her fingers tightening. He could feel her trembling, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. "I was never yours to have plans for." Devlin's expression hardened. "You know, I have been thinking about that day a lot, about how you," he pointed at Yates, "claimed you were setting her free. But here she is, still with you months later. Makes a man wonder what really happened to that contract you tore up. Makes him wonder if maybe you did not set her as free as you claimed." "She is free," Yates said, his voice dropping into dangerous territory. "Completely free. She stays because she chooses to, not because of any contract or obligation." "Is that so?" Devlin took a drag of his cigarette, blew the smoke in their direction. "Then maybe Miss Bradford would like to hear about the opportunities available at my establishment. Good pay, light work, much more comfortable than roughing it in a mountain shack." "I have heard enough about your opportunities," Lila said sharply, "and I want nothing to do with them or you. Now, if you will excuse us." She tried to move past, but Devlin shifted to block their path. "Now hold on just a minute. I'm trying to do you a favor here, girl. Winter is coming, and that cabin is no place for a lady. You will freeze or starve or go mad from isolation. Come work for me, and you will have heat, food, company. All the comforts a woman could want." "Move," Yates said quietly. Something in his tone made Devlin actually look at him, really look. What he saw in Yates' face made him take a step back. "Just trying to help," he muttered. "Your help is not wanted or needed," Yates said. "And if I hear you have been spreading rumors about Lila or bothering her in any way, we are going to have a problem. A serious one. Understood?" Devlin tried to maintain his bravado, but fear flickered in his eyes. He was a bully and a schemer, but he was no fighter, and he recognized the very real threat standing before him. "Understood," he said finally. They left him there and finished their business in town quickly. By the time they started back up the mountain trail, the sun was high overhead and both of them were tense from the encounter. "I am sorry," Lila said after they had been walking for an hour in silence. I know going to town was a risk. Not your fault, Yates replied. Men like Devlin always find reasons to cause trouble. I just wish I had hit him. That startled a laugh out of her. Yates Fletcher, are you saying you wanted to start a brawl in the middle of Park City? Maybe, he admitted. The way he looked at you, the things he was implying. It made me want to put my fist through his face. Lila was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Thank you for defending me, for defending us." "Always," Yates said before he could stop himself. They made camp that night at the same spot where they had stayed on the journey up months ago. So much had changed since then, Yates thought as he built the fire. That night, Lila had been a frightened woman with no options, and he had been a loner doing a good deed. Now she was confident and capable, and he was a man hopelessly in love. After they had eaten and were sitting by the fire with coffee, Lila said, "Devlin was wrong, you know, about me going mad from isolation or hating the winter." "Was he?" Yates asked carefully. "Yes, because I am not staying out of desperation or lack of other options. I am staying because I want to, because these past months have been the happiest of my life." She looked at him across the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames. "Because of you, Yates. Because of the man you are, the life we have built together. I love it there. I love the cabin, the mountains, the peace, and I love you." The world seemed to stop. Yates stared at her, certain he had misheard. "What?" "I love you," Lila repeated, her voice trembling but certain. "I think I have been falling in love with you since that first day, when you tore up those papers and set me free. No one has ever done anything like that for me. No one has ever seen me as a person worth saving just because it was the right thing to do. And then getting to know you, living with you, watching how you care for everything around you with such gentleness, despite being so strong. How could I not fall in love?" Yates could not breathe. His heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought they might crack. "Lila, you do not have to say these things. You do not owe me anything." "I know I do not owe you," she said, and now there was heat in her words. "That is exactly the point. This is not obligation or gratitude, though I am grateful. This is me choosing you the same way you chose to help me. I am choosing to tell you how I feel, even though it terrifies me, because I cannot keep pretending I do not feel it anymore." She stood up and walked around the fire to stand in front of him. "So I am asking you, Yates Fletcher, do you feel anything for me beyond responsibility and kindness? Because if you do, I need you to tell me. And if you do not, tell me that too, and we will find a way to move forward as friends and nothing more." Yates rose to his feet, towering over her but feeling like she was the one with all the power. His hands shook as he reached up to cup her face, his calloused thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have been in love with you for weeks, maybe months. Every morning I wake up grateful that you are there. Every night I lie awake listening to you breathe and thanking God you are safe. You are the bravest, strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known, and I love you so much it scares me." Lila's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Then why did you not say anything?" "Because I did not want you to feel pressured. Because you were there because I helped you, and I could not stomach the thought of you thinking you had to love me back out of obligation or fear." "You foolish man," Lila said, but her tone was tender. "Did it never occur to you that I might actually want to love you, that you might be worth loving just for yourself?" Before he could answer, she rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, but when Yates pulled her closer and deepened the kiss, it became something fierce and desperate. All the longing of the past months, all the restrained feelings and careful distance, it poured into that kiss until they were both breathless. When they finally broke apart, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said, Lila pulled back to look at him, her eyes wide. "What? Marry me," he repeated. "I know it is fast. I know we should probably wait, but I do not want to wait. I want you to be my wife. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are mine and I am yours. I want to spend my life making you happy. So marry me, Lila Bradford, please." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." They kissed again, and this time there was joy in it, pure and unrestrained. When they finally settled back down by the fire, Lila curled against Yates' side, his arm around her shoulders, and they talked until the fire burned low. They talked about the future, about what their life would be like. They talked about building onto the cabin, maybe adding a proper bedroom. They talked about how they would make the trip to Park City before winter to find a preacher, make it legal and proper. "I want children someday," Lila said softly. "Is that something you want too?" "Yes," Yates said, imagining a little girl with Lila's eyes, a boy with his dark hair. "I want that very much." They fell asleep wrapped in the same bedroll that night, holding each other close, and when morning came, everything felt different, brighter somehow. They were no longer two people sharing space, they were partners, lovers, committed to a future together. The journey back to the cabin was filled with laughter and stolen kisses. They could not keep their hands off each other, constantly reaching out to touch, to connect. By the time they crested the final rise and saw their home waiting, Yates felt like his heart might burst. "Welcome home," he said, pulling Lila close. "Home," she repeated and smiled. "Yes, that is exactly what it is." They spent the rest of July and most of August preparing for their wedding trip to Park City and the coming winter. Lila sewed herself a dress from the new fabric, simple but pretty, in a deep blue that matched her eyes. Yates built furniture, adding a proper bedroom onto the cabin just as they had discussed. They worked side by side, and every evening they would sit together and plan, dream, imagine the life they were building. In early September, when the aspens were just beginning to turn gold, they made the journey back to Park City. This time there was no tension, only excitement. They found a circuit preacher who agreed to perform the ceremony, and they were married in a small church with just 2 witnesses pulled in from the street. Yates had purchased a simple gold band for Lila, spending the last of his money without hesitation. When he slipped it onto her finger and the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, he kissed her with all the love in his heart, and she kissed him back just as fiercely. They stayed in Park City just long enough to file the marriage certificate and purchase a few last supplies, then headed back up the mountain as fast as they could. Both of them were eager to return to their cabin, to begin their married life in the place that had brought them together. Their wedding night was everything Yates had dreamed of and more. Lila came to him without fear or hesitation, and they loved each other with a passion that left them both breathless. Afterwards, lying tangled together in the new bedroom he had built, Yates held his wife close and thanked whatever powers had brought her into his life. "I love you, Mrs. Fletcher," he murmured against her hair. "I love you too, Mr. Fletcher," she replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the high peaks in late October with a fury that reminded Yates why he had always feared for anyone living at this altitude. But the cabin was tight and well provisioned, and with Lila beside him, the isolation felt less like loneliness and more like blessed privacy. They spent the long winter days working on various projects. Lila taught Yates to read better than he had learned in his limited schooling, sharing the few books she had brought with her from Boston. He taught her to shoot, how to handle his rifles and set traps, skills she might need if anything ever happened to him. They cooked together, told stories, made love by firelight, and learned every detail of each other's bodies and hearts. When the snow was too deep to go outside, They would lie in bed and Yates would run his hands over Lila's body, mapping every curve and plane. He marveled that she was his, that this remarkable woman had chosen him. And Lila would trace the scars on his chest and back, each one a story of survival, and tell him he was beautiful. "How can I be beautiful?" he asked once with a laugh. "I am too big, too rough, covered in scars." "You are beautiful to me," Lila said simply. "Strong and kind and gentle despite everything you have been through. You are exactly what a man should be, Yates. My man." Spring came eventually, as it always did, melting the snow and coaxing green shoots from the earth. On a warm day in late April, Lila told Yates she was pregnant. He had been chopping wood when she came out to tell him, and he nearly dropped the axe. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be," she said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I have missed my courses for 2 months now, and I have been sick in the mornings. I think we are going to have a baby, Yates." He crossed to her in 3 long strides and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around as she laughed. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Lila asked, though she must have seen the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Yates said, setting her down carefully and placing his large hand over hers on her stomach. "I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. A baby, our baby." They spent the summer preparing for the new arrival. Yates built a cradle from smooth pine, carving little animals into the headboard. Lila sewed tiny clothes and blankets. They talked endlessly about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about how they would raise their child in this wilderness. As Lila's belly grew, Yates found himself becoming even more protective. He rarely left her alone, always making sure she had everything she needed. He worried constantly about the birth, about what would happen when the time came with no doctor for miles. "Women have been giving birth in remote places since the beginning of time," Lila reminded him when his worry became too obvious. "I will be fine. We will be fine." "I cannot lose you," Yates said fiercely. "I cannot lose either of you." "You will not," Lila promised, pulling him close. "I am strong and you will be there with me. We will face this together just like we face everything." Their daughter was born on a cold night in late December, arriving 3 weeks earlier than expected during a snowstorm. Yates delivered the baby himself, his hands shaking but steady as he guided the tiny life into the world. When she finally emerged, red-faced and screaming with healthy lungs, he wept openly for the first time since childhood. "She is perfect," Lila gasped, reaching for the baby. "Let me see her, let me hold her." Yates placed the infant in her mother's arms after cleaning her carefully and watched as Lila counted fingers and toes, examined every perfect feature. "What should we name her?" he asked. "I was thinking Emma," Lila said. "Emma Fletcher. What do you think?" "Emma," Yates repeated, testing the name. "I think it is perfect, just like her, just like you." He sat on the bed beside his wife and new daughter, his arm around both of them, and marveled at how completely his life had transformed. 2 years ago he had been alone, bitter, hiding from the world in these mountains. Now he had a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up every morning with joy instead of resignation. "Thank you," he said quietly. Lila looked up at him. "For what?" "For choosing me, for loving me. For giving me this life. I never thought I deserved to be happy, but you make me believe I do." "You have always deserved happiness," Lila said firmly. "You just needed someone to help you see it." She smiled and leaned against him. "Besides, I am the one who should be thanking you. You saved my life that day in Park City in more ways than you realize. You gave me freedom and home and love. You gave me everything." "We saved each other," Yates said, kissing her forehead, then the baby's soft head. "And now we have this perfect little life to protect and love." Emma grew quickly, thriving in the mountain air. She had Lila's gray eyes and Yates' dark hair, and by the time she was 6 months old, her personality was already emerging. She was curious and fearless, always reaching for new things, always wanting to explore. Yates proved to be a devoted father. He wore Emma strapped to his chest while he worked, talking to her constantly, showing her the animals and plants of the forest. Lila would watch them together and feel her heart swell with love. This man, this gentle giant who had saved her from a terrible fate, was the best husband and father she could have imagined. When Emma was a year old, Lila discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was expected and just as joyfully received. Their son was born in October, a big healthy boy they named Thomas after Yates' father. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. The cabin that had once sheltered one lonely man now rang with children's laughter and family warmth. They expanded again, adding another room as the children grew. Yates' trap lines remained profitable, and they made yearly trips to Park City for supplies, though they never stayed longer than necessary. The mountains were their home, their sanctuary, the place where their love had grown and flourished. Over the years, 3 more children joined the family. Another daughter named Sarah, then twin boys they called James and William. The cabin grew with them, sprawling across the meadow in a rambling collection of rooms that somehow all fit together perfectly. Yates taught his sons to trap and hunt, to respect the wilderness and live within it harmoniously. Lila taught her daughters to read and write, to think critically, to believe in their own worth. Together they raised children who were strong and kind, capable and compassionate. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates and Lila climbed up to a high meadow above the cabin, leaving the older children in charge of the younger ones for a few hours. They sat on a flat rock overlooking the 3 mountain ranges Yates had told her about that first day, and watched the sun set in a glory of purple and gold. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Staying here, raising our family so far from civilization. You could have had an easier life somewhere else." "Easier, maybe," Lila said, leaning into his warmth, "but not better, not fuller, not more filled with love." She looked up at him, this man whose face she knew as well as her own now, whose strength had never faltered, whose love had never wavered. "You emptied your pouch and set me free that day, but what you really did was give me a chance at real life. A life I chose, with the man I love, in this place that has become more home than anywhere I have ever lived." She touched his face gently. "I have never regretted a single moment, Yates." "Not one." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, the kiss of a man who knew he had been blessed beyond measure. "I love you, Lila Fletcher, more now than even that first day I told you, more every year, every moment. You are everything to me." "And you are everything to me," she replied. They sat until the stars emerged, brilliant in the mountain darkness, then made their way back down to the cabin and their children. Inside, the fire would be burning warm, the house full of noise and laughter and love. It was not the life either of them had imagined for themselves, but it was exactly the life they were meant to live. 20 more years passed in the blink of an eye. The children grew up strong and capable, one by one leaving the mountain to seek their own adventures, though they always came home for visits. Emma married a rancher from Park City and started her own family. Thomas became a surveyor, traveling throughout the territory. Sarah shocked everyone by becoming one of the first female doctors in Utah. The twins took over their father's trap lines, building their own cabins nearby so they could continue the life they loved while starting families of their own. Yates and Lila grew older together, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. Yates' hair turned gray, then white, and his powerful frame became leaner with age. Lila's face gained lines around her eyes and mouth, marks of a life filled with laughter and love. But when Yates looked at her, he still saw the woman on that auction block, brave and defiant despite her fear. And when Lila looked at him, she still saw her mountain man, strong and protective and endlessly kind. On a summer evening when Yates was 73 and Lila 69, they sat together on the porch he had built onto the cabin years ago. Their grandchildren played in the meadow below, 6 of them ranging in age from 3 to 15. The twins had brought their families up for a visit, and the cabin was bursting with life just like the old days. "We have had a good life," Lila said, her hand in Yates as it had been thousands of times before. "The best life," Yates agreed. "Better than I ever deserved." "Stop that," Lila chided, as she had countless times over the years. "You deserved every bit of happiness we found. You were and are the best man I have ever known." Yates squeezed her hand gently. "Whatever I was, whatever good I managed to do in this world, it was because of you. You made me believe I could be more than my past. You gave me a reason to be better, to try harder, to love fully." He looked at her, this woman who had been his whole world for so long. "That day I emptied my pouch and bought your contract. I thought I was saving you, but the truth is, you saved me. You gave me everything that mattered." Lila felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears born of a lifetime of love. "We saved each other," she said, echoing words he had spoken long ago. "Two broken people who found each other and made something beautiful." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren play, listening to their sons and daughters-in-law laugh inside the cabin. The sun painted the mountains in shades of pink and gold, and a cool breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. It was a perfect moment, the kind that made up a perfect life. "I would do it again," Yates said suddenly. "Every moment, every hardship, every joy. If I could go back to that day in Park City and choose again, I would empty my pouch 1,000 times over just to have you in my life." "And I would choose you," Lila said, leaning against his shoulder. "Every single time I would choose you." As the stars began to emerge and someone lit lamps inside the cabin, casting warm light across the meadow, Yates Fletcher and Lila Bradford Fletcher held hands and counted their blessings. A family that loved each other, a home built by their own hands, decades of memories, and a love that had never faltered or faded. It was everything. It was enough. It was more than either of them had dared to dream of that spring day in 1872, when a mountain man saw a woman who needed help and chose to empty his pouch and set her free, never imagining that in doing so he would free himself as well. Their story had begun with an act of kindness and compassion, with one person seeing another's humanity and choosing to act. But it had become so much more than that. It had become a testament to the power of love, to the strength of commitment, to the beauty that could be found in the most unexpected places. A saloon owner had bid $50 for a contract. A mountain man had emptied his pouch and changed both their lives forever. And in the end, that single moment of choice, that decision to help another human being without expectation of return, had blossomed into a lifetime of happiness, into children and grandchildren, into a home filled with laughter, into love that grew deeper with each passing year. It had given them everything that mattered, everything that made life worth living. As the evening deepened and the family gathered for supper, calling Yates and Lila inside to join them, they rose from their chairs hand in hand. They walked into the warmth and light of their home, surrounded by the family they had created, living the life they had built together. The auction block and contract were distant memories now, faded into the past where they belonged. What remained was the present, rich and full, and the knowledge that they had chosen each other, chosen love, chosen to build something lasting and good. Their story, which had started with the tearing up of papers that claimed one person could own another, had become a story of true freedom. The freedom to choose to love, to create a life on their own terms. And that freedom, hard-won and carefully nurtured over decades, was the greatest gift they had ever given each other. Inside the cabin, surrounded by the noise and chaos and joy of family, Yates pulled Lila close and kissed her forehead. She smiled up at him, her eyes still that remarkable storm gray, and in them he saw everything they had been and everything they still were. Partners, lovers, best friends, parents, grandparents. Two souls who had found each other when they needed it most and had chosen every day since to keep choosing each other. It was a story worth telling, a love worth celebrating, a life worth living. And as the evening wore on and the mountains stood sentinel around their home, Yates Fletcher and Lila Bradford Fletcher knew with absolute certainty that their greatest adventure had been simply loving each other, fully and completely, for all the years they had been given. The fire crackled in the hearth, children's laughter rang out, and outside the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance. In that small cabin in the Utah mountains, built by hard work and determination, filled with love and memory, a family gathered. And at the center of it all was the love story that had started with $50 and an empty pouch, and had grown into something immeasurable and precious beyond all the gold in the mountains. It was a love that would echo through generations, told and retold by children and grandchildren until it became legend. The story of how a mountain man saved a woman from a terrible fate, and how she saved him right back, giving him something he thought he had lost forever: hope, purpose, and a reason to believe in goodness again. This was their legacy, this love story written across decades and mountains, in children raised and homes built and quiet moments shared. And it was everything